Hi, this is Krista Moore with The Krista Moore Show, and this is a live program and actually a special edition today. Every third Wednesday of the month, we are doing a special show just for Advantage dealers, and this is brought to you by K Coaching, ID Growth, and SP Richards. So I'm glad you're joining us. This is also available for re-listening at a later date. You can go out to the Advantage Dealer Sales Vault and listen to any of the past recordings in case you want to share this with someone afterwards. We have a great guest lined up and a terrific subject and very timely subject for today. So many of you know Charlie Cleary with Cleary Consulting, and he is working very closely with SP Richards on the GAP program. And we're going to learn today about what the heck's going on in the industry with all the mergers and acquisitions, and also learn more about the GAP program. So I'd like to welcome Charlie Cleary. Charlie, how are you?
Krista, I am excellent. Thank you. How are
Great.
you?
I'm terrific.
Good.
Thanks. Good to have you here.
Nice
And
to
we
see
have
you.
a lot to talk about today. And we have a great audience of business owners, sales leaders, and CEOs that are anxious to learn more about mergers and acquisitions and what is happening in the independent channel, and also more about valuations and how can they kind of be planning and preparing for the future. So a lot to
Okay.
cover. Why don't you do a little bit of an introduction of yourself for those in our audience that really aren't familiar with you and your background?
So for the past 5 years, I have been on my own with Cleary Consulting, doing merger and acquisition work with independent dealers. Prior to that, I was the president of Trimega Purchasing Association, the buying group for independent dealers. I did that for about 10 years. Prior to that, I was the president, general manager of an independent office products dealer, Hartford Office Supply in Hartford, Connecticut, and did that for about 15 years. And I started in the industry with Boise Cascade Office Products coming out of school, and that's
Hmm.
where I learned about this business.
Yeah, so it's an extensive background both from the power channel, the independent community, the buying, and the wholesaling. And I think a lot of your work today is definitely focused on the GAP program with SP Richards with Cleary Consulting. And I would imagine because of how crazy this industry has been over the past couple of years in terms of consolidation and mergers.
So, and it has been crazy, Kristen, no question about it. And maybe most notably, the recent acquisition, Staples of Ascendant, probably
That's right.
something that few or any of us saw coming, but really has made things a bit crazier, it would appear, in the industry than it's been.
Yeah.
Um, and, and, and having some impact on dealers, as you know, from those that you've spoken to.
Sure. And I think too, there's a lot of interest in what's Office Depot doing, right? Because they're seeing a lot of acquisitions of some of the larger dealers and a whole new strategy of how they're going after the market and acquiring independents. So I thought what we would do is let's break this down a little bit. Let's unpack it. Let's talk about Staples and maybe what you know, having your ear to the grind on this, what you know is going on with Staples in terms of their strategy and their plans moving forward, and the Ascendant acquisition. What do you know there?
So the Staples acquisition of Ascendant, right, makes, owned by Sycamore Partners, makes for a $25 billion combined Staples Ascendant business. What the strategy is that Sycamore or Staples has for that acquisition remains to be seen. For now, it appears, and they talked a great deal about the firewall between the two companies, that Staples will continue to operate as it does, and they will support Ascendant operating independently. Again, all that remains to be seen, and there may be some doubt in the marketplace about that. Um, Staples, up to the acquisition, had been fairly acquisitive itself in buying some independent dealers. It will be interesting to see if that continues moving forward, because we are aware that the FTC has put some requirements on future acquisitions by Sycamore, Staples, and Ascendant in the office products industry, now requiring review, if not approval, by the FTC before they're permitted to or able to make acquisitions moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see how acquisitive Staples is with independent dealers in the future, or under Ascendant is with acquisitions.
So when you think about what's happened in the Staples Ascendant new world, what impact do you see that having on mid and small size independent dealers?
Yeah. So interestingly, the many dealers that have now been in the industry for 3 or 4 decades, somewhat discouraged by their largest supplier being owned by arguably their largest competitor. There's been an increase in the number of 65-year-old plus business owners interested in figuring out how can they sell their business, how can they get out of this crazy industry that they feel that they're now in. So in recent months, a real increase in the number of dealers interested in finding out, what's my business worth? You know, is it sellable? Is that something I can do? And how quickly can I do it?
Yeah.
So interesting change dynamic that's occurred in the recent months.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about it from that angle, but if I were an independent and there was such a major shift taking place in the channel, you'd be sitting there saying, okay, I've got to do something different, right? Am I going to buy? Am I going to sell? Am I going to grow? What's the plan? What's my new normal look like moving forward because of the changes that are going on around me? And I would also believe that there is a little bit of a threat of Office Depot, and maybe you can explain a little bit more clearly to the audience. Office Depot is doing acquisitions. They're keeping them supposedly separate and keeping them independent, but don't they own them? And a tag on to that is I heard this term federation the other day for the first time, like this group of independents that Office Depot bought is internally kind of called the federation. And I'm wondering what is that? Do you have any knowledge or thoughts on any of what I just said?
So we saw last year that Office Depot acquired a number of dealers. It may be about a dozen or so. They are larger dealers in the industry and are continuing to operate those dealers independently from Office Depot, at least for now. And that group of acquired dealers has been referred to, I've heard, as the federation of dealers within Office Depot, and continuing to, as I said, for the time being, operate it separately from the Office Depot business. It appears that it is part of Office Depot's strategy to continue to be acquisitive with these $20 million plus in annual revenue dealers, and that appears to be the target level based on what we've seen. So it would appear that it continues to be a Depot strategy for growing their business, which is exactly what these acquisitions have done as we continue into this year.
Well, and I would imagine since there's competition, or maybe there was more competition between Staples and Depot to buy and purchase these 20 million plus larger dealers, that was bringing the value of that independent up. Is that safe to say?
So that's a fair statement, Krista. I mean, we've seen that the $20 million plus dealer that's been acquired by Depot or Staples has been selling for higher valuation than we had previously seen. Mm-hmm. And that, to a great extent, you've got both competing for those acquisitions. That's going to drive up the valuation of those larger dealerships. That's exactly what's happened.
Well, and then consequently, if Staples is not going to continue down that path because of the regulations that they might have to abide by with Sycamore, maybe that hurts the value of independence moving forward. It's kind of crazy to try and predict.
Yeah, so with it's an interesting point with the larger dealers. If Staples is somewhat handcuffed in future acquisitions, that
Mhm.
may in fact bring down the valuation because you have Depot doing all of the buying of the larger dealers, and as a result of that, it would bring down the valuation.
Yeah.
It's also interesting as these larger dealers have been acquired by Depot and Staples, right? There are fewer larger dealers, and that at a time, my previous reference to an increase in the number of sellers, and that because of the dynamic change that we're seeing in the arguably disruptive change that we're seeing in the industry.
Yeah.
But that has, interestingly, with an increase in supply of sellers and fewer buyers because they're being acquired by Office Depot and some by Staples, it's actually driving down or at least stabilizing pricing for the under $20 million in the industry.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk about the independent channel for a moment and kind of the status, so to speak. And I remember, I mean, we both have been proponents of the office products independence for many years. And, in the old days, there was 10,000 and then there was 5,000. And so can you share with us maybe some stats on what are some of the segmentation models today for the independent channel and how many are out there? Do you have any numbers on that?
So it's interesting you mentioned the 10,000 and going back to Staples opened the first retail store back in 1985, and at that time NOPA reported that there were 13,000 independent dealers. Today that number is down to best guess 1,500 independent dealers that there are in the industry. Annual sales volume for those independent dealers collectively, somewhere around $4 billion. That in contrast to Office Depot at $11 billion, and you have Staples ascending combined at $25 billion. Independents, 1,500 of them being supported by SP Richards, a $2 billion wholesaler that is focused on continuing to focus on servicing those independent dealers without competing with them, arguably something that's happening over on the Ascendant Staples side currently.
Yeah.
And then talk a little bit about maybe the valuations. We said that, there's some smaller dealers' valuations stabilized or declining, and at the larger end, we had seen the valuations rising as Office Depot was becoming more acquisitive. It's interesting, but in general, we have this size segmentation for valuations today where, and we talk about valuation in terms of percentage of sales just because it's a benchmark that makes it a little bit easier for everyone to understand.
Yeah.
Reality is that valuations are based on a multiple of adjusted earnings per dealer. We'll talk a bit more about valuations in a minute, but just as a percentage of sales benchmark and what we have seen out there in the last 6 months in terms of closed transactions and valuations, that under $5 million dealer valuations are running between 10 and 15% of sales. The $5 to $10 million dealer is seeing valuations or selling for purchase price of between 15 and 20%. The $10 to $20 million dealer is valuation of 20 to 25%, and then those larger dealers, that $20 million plus group of dealers is 25% plus closing price based on the data that we have.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm really anxious to talk through today is what can independent dealers do today to work on their business, to be able to create an environment for a buyer, so to speak, that is going to be more attractive and also get more money for their dealership. I see probably an equal amount of those independent dealers, let's say in that 1,500 amount range, that they're all in. They want to continue to grow. They're being strategic. They're hiring the right people. They don't want to be bought or sold, and maybe they already have a succession plan in place, and they're here for the long haul. And maybe they're in a unique market too that really they'll be able to flourish well in. So you've got that group, and then I think you have another segment, and I'll just call them a little lost souls, for lack of a better way to describe it. They'd love for someone to call and want to acquire them, and or they want to understand, is there an interested buyer? So we have a lot of sellers potentially on this call today. So I'd like to appeal to them. And let's talk about, I know you've mentioned there's like 4 or 5 things that you look at that help you determine, that gap, between the 20 and the 25, or the 15 and the 20%, based on how you would value them. So why don't we start and kind of talk through that? What are some things that you look at?
So we refer to them as the value drivers in valuation of dealers, and there's really 5 value drivers today that are increasing value for dealers. And it starts with the sales growth. We're looking for companies that are, despite the challenging conditions in the industry, have been able to grow for 3 consecutive years and are able to sell at 26% plus profit margin, gross margin, in today's environment. That the sales growth is a key component to valuation and the first real value driver for a business.
I want to touch upon that one, Charlie, if you don't mind. I get this question asked frequently, and that is, dealers tend to want to know like benchmarks or where they stand. And we do a lot of CPR analysis for dealers, where we're helping them with understanding their data and where their business is coming and going and where the growth is coming from. But what percentage of dealers are growing? And again, I'm just talking about these 1,500, like that subset, are growing 3 years consecutively. And what percentage are, what's the average? And I know there's lots of variables, but what's the average gross profit percent?
So there's unfortunately 20% of the dealers of the remaining 1,500 have been able to grow for the last 3 consecutive years. The growth rates that we're seeing are somewhere between 2 and 5%. Dealers and where's the growth coming from? It's coming from product diversification, the
Yes.
Jan/San brake room category, safety categories being most notable.
Mm-hmm.
Those that are all in with those product categories are the ones that are seeing the growth. Dealers that have not diversified into product category growth are declining by 2 to 3% by just hanging on to what they have.
Yeah.
The other growth driver has been acquisitions. So product diversification and acquisitions is what's driving growth, and it's only 20% of the dealers that have 3 consecutive years of growth from the database that we have.
As far as the gross profit percentage, is 26 an average?
So average it is for the dealers under $20 million. That
Yes.
26% is the average gross profit margin that we're seeing today. Yeah. Really, regardless of business model, whether it's entirely stockless or partially stockless, meaning they're stocking some limited number of items. At 26% is the average gross profit margin that we see with dealers.
Thanks for answering that, because I know that that's always a curiosity question, and it's more so, they're independent and they just want to make sure that they're keeping up with others, or that they're not, lagging too far behind. But if looking at 3 years of growth and looking at the margins is number one in part of your valuation process, then clearly those that are on the line today need to be thinking about profitability and continued sales growth in order to create more value in their business. What would be the second
Absolutely.
one?
So second is really then maintaining operating expenses at somewhere around 21% of sales, so that you are able to put approximately 5% operating income on the bottom line. If profit margin is 26% and you're able to keep operating expenses at 21%, then you're going to see 5% income as a company. Fairly simple business that we're running.
Yeah.
And that's the second key item for valuation, is maintaining relatively low operating expenses to be able to generate bottom line income.
Do you have any best practices or advice in that area? If you're in and you're doing your consulting or your discovery with a particular dealer, those that are doing terrific when it comes to managing the operational costs, what are some things that you see working really well?
So it's the single largest line item of expense that every dealer has in their budget, in their income statement, is payroll. So it's effectively managing people and payroll that is key to managing overall operating expenses, combined with making sure that they're leveraging today's technology to allow for the kind of productivity that people can generate when they have the right technology. So,
yeah.
And
I was going to
one of
say,
the values.
go ahead. I think we're both thinking the same thing. I'm sure that dealers' current technology and how advanced they are comes into play when you're doing your evaluation. But go ahead.
So to your point, it's a key value driver, technology, and dealers that have invested in the technology that's available out there today, whether it's an ECI platform or BMI or in some cases proprietary software. But for most of the dealers, it's an ECI platform such as DDMS. Investing in that technology and the important part, the customer-facing technology that's available, has been critically important and a real value driver when we're looking at valuation on businesses. The consumer has made clear they absolutely want to buy office products online.
That's right.
We see that based on the size of a Staples or an Office Depot as an online retailer. Clearly indicates that consumers want to buy office supplies online. Dealers that have invested in the right technology are able to compete because there is software available today through ECI, BMI, to be able to provide that. That's a key driver.
One thing that I'm curious about too, Charlie, and maybe this is more in line with, what are the average kind of things that I know many dealers are looking for. But for years, we've been training dealers on how to sell online ordering and to make sure that they, have the tools and the technology that they need to be able to compete effectively against the power channel. But also just getting customers ordering online. And I think it took a really long time for independents to embrace that. And maybe it's not so much just the independent, but the small businesses of the customers of the independents to embrace it. But what would you say is the online ordering percentage today? I know my number that I see, with a core group of independents, but I'm just wondering, is there an average that you see? What percentage of orders are being processed online? Let's just take this group of 1,500.
So again, it seems with the larger dealers that have really driven online ordering with their customers, because they're competing with Staples and Office Depot. We're today seeing better than 80% online transactions for those larger dealers. I would say on average, when we're looking at the smaller dealers, the medium-sized dealers, that number is probably somewhere closer to 60% online transactions. And to put that in perspective with where Staples and Office Depot are with their traditional commercial type business, I mean, both of them are running at 98% plus online transactions. So
Yeah.
you're right, independent's still a bit behind the curve with online transactions. Clearly the way the consumer wants to go, and work that needs to continue to be done by the
Yeah. And
independent dealer.
something they can continue to focus on. You're right. So we covered 3 of the 5 drivers. What are the last 2?
So having a key manager that can run the business post sale of the business is really key, because buyers are looking for acquiring a turnkey business that they want to be able to over time integrate to their business. But to do that successfully, they need someone that can continue to run that business for them during that integration process and even after that.
Yeah.
So
Are they looking for it to be the business owner, or you're just saying any kind of experienced leader or manager?
So in many cases, it's not the business owner. It can be, but in most cases, a majority of cases, it's a sales manager.
Okay.
Maybe an ops manager, but the
Mm-hmm.
sales manager seems to be best suited to be able to manage, run the sales being sold to a business that can handle the operation side.
That's right.
That's a key component in driving valuation
Okay.
for the seller.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And then what's the 5th one? I think it was non-compete
So
agreements or something like that.
It's all about people. Exactly. I mean, what are the assets that a dealer is selling? It's sales and people.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the key manager, and to protect sales and even retain a key manager, having non-compete agreements in place for salespeople and key manager is a key value driver for the sellers today.
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine many don't have non-compete agreements. And how difficult is it then for a dealer to just all of a sudden make their sales reps sign non-compete agreements? What's your experience with that?
So not as difficult, complicated today as it may have been 5 years or certainly 10 years ago. And that because there's fewer options for salespeople. I mean, they don't want to go work for Staples or Depot.
Mm-hmm.
There are fewer independents, to our point earlier, than there have been. So not a lot of options. And with the right non-compete, non-solicitation agreement and the right kind of affordable incentive program for salespeople to sign that, something that we help dealers with, both in terms of the agreement itself, but the process and how to get it done, that it is attainable, something that can happen today and really helps driving valuation when you're selling a business.
I would imagine, because what they're buying, you're right, are the people assets, both customers and salespeople.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'd like to shift a moment, and thank you for your insight on some of this, because I think that there's a lot to be learned about kind of what's going on in the market today. But I would like to highlight the GAP program. You're intimately involved in it. SP's done a tremendous job executing on the GAP program. I'd like you to tell our audience some maybe high-level statistics on the success of the GAP program. And then if you could dive into what are the different steps that you would begin getting engaged with dealers if they're interested in acquisitions. So why don't you start with, tell us about GAP in general, and then we'll dive into how it all works.
The Guided Acquisition Program, or GAP, is SP's program designed to assist dealers in selling their business because it's something that they've never done before, don't know anything about. And so designed so that we can make it a little bit easier and more understandable for them. As well as to provide assistance to those acquisitive dealers, and there are much fewer of them out there, but also designed to help the buyers.
Yeah.
So the GAP program itself right? And everything is done under confidentiality agreement between myself, Cleary Consulting, and the dealer.
Uh-huh.
Information is not shared with SP or anybody else, so that we're able to quickly understand and create valuation of the business, which is step one in the process, is creating a business valuation report for the seller so that the owner knows exactly what their business is worth.
Okay. And so you're going in and based on your experience and your knowledge of what's happening in the market, able to produce a report back to them, just kind of high level on what they can expect. Is that right?
So exactly right. So we obtain information from the dealer, the seller, the 3 years of financials, income statement, balance sheet, and then additional information that I obtain from them about their business, so that we can take that information, those are the variables, and input them to a report that will, based on actual market data, the comparative data of actual transactions closed in the market, able to provide back to them based on their size and those variables what their business is actually worth.
Well, is there a cost associated with that, or is there a commitment to go that far? You know, if they just want that, let's say, are they at a point where they're committing to selling, or are they investing in that in some way?
So there is a cost to it. That cost is borne by SP Richards, who is providing this service to its independent dealer members.
Okay.
And so the question to the dealer is, you know, is this something, are you interested in selling your business within the next 6 months?
Okay.
If so, we're delighted to assist you with this process, because valuations are changing over time, as we talked about earlier.
So the
But
commitment
any dealer
needs to.
interested, within 6 months, we can provide this valuation and consultation service to, which is really the second step in the process.
Yes.
Part of the valuation is the consultation, helping the dealer understand what their business is worth, what the value drivers are, what's good about their business, what could improve, and then coaching them through that, and trying to understand, are they really ready to move forward, sell the business at this time based on what it's worth. But there's not an obligation to sell until they're ready to do so, to answer that question.
Yeah. And I don't know if I'm interpreting this appropriately, but I feel like that first step is the dollars and cents, so to speak, and the legality or confidentiality piece. The second step, where you're coaching and consulting, is more about the heart of it and getting to understand what the wants and the needs are of the business owner or the seller. Do I interpret that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely correct. So does the owner, and this is the next step of marrying the right buyer and seller together, need to understand how the seller wants to sell the business before we can do the marrying of the right buyer and seller.
So
buyer want to stay or go after the sale of the business. Is it important to retain all of the employees? Yes or no? Is there a lease on the current facility that needs to be assumed by the buyer? Those many detailed questions that I need to understand to be able to help the seller sell their business the way they want it sold, and then importantly, finding the right buyer.
Okay. So then I have another curiosity question. Are you representing the seller or the buyer, or both?
So both. It's kind of interesting. It's both, really. I mean, we're trying to facilitate in a process that can be very expensive and very complicated with lawyers and accountants, where we have, over the past 4 years, been very successful in minimizing expense, legal expense, accounting expense, in being able to coach and work with both buyer and seller. And we talk them through the legal documents that we have. So a letter of intent for the offer, a purchase agreement for the actual document controlling the transaction. Those are things that we can coach them through, talk them through. So if there's outside lawyers involved, we can help reduce expense,
Okay.
save time in the process. But working with both and some coaching to try and get a deal done.
To marry it up well. So do you have a list of buyers and a list of sellers? So you kind of like a matchmaker, Charlie?
So we absolutely, that's part of the service.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there are buyers out there that we have worked with and that are interested in acquisitions. And the seller part of it is the dynamic and always changing, right? And again, the industry changes, the disruptive changes have increased number of buyers recently, as we said earlier. But yes, so we're absolutely doing the matchmaking between buyer and seller and trying to facilitate getting a deal done at fair market value so that we can do it affordably and quickly to the benefit of seller as well as buyer.
Yeah.
And that really is the GAP program.
I was just thinking, I guess the GAP program's like 4 years old, right? 4 or 5 years old?
Correct.
Okay.
4 years that we've been in the market.
And I would think just in the past year, because of the changes that have taken place, that things are probably really bubbling up, right? Just because of the shift in what's happening with Office Depot's strategy and then looking at Staples acquiring Ascendant. But the heart of the program really remains the same, which is let's support the independent dealer channel by matching buyers and sellers so that they can continue to grow and prosper and compete in a highly competitive environment. And at the same time, if it's SP Richards' program, that's good for them as well because they're the wholesaler. And in this case, they're really the only wholesaler. And so I would imagine the GAP program is becoming more and more popular. Would that be a correct statement? I would imagine.
Very well.
Yeah.
That's very well said. I mean, that's exactly what and this is in SP's best interest because they can help keep independent dealers strong and growing to their benefit, right? In exchange for these dealers continuing to buy from SP Richards in the future.
And one of the biggest challenges we see with any merger or acquisition is the integration. And to make sure that customers are retained and business isn't lost, right? You're getting what you paid for, so to speak. And I would imagine that the GAP program has a component of that where you're not just going to match them up and then say bye-bye. I mean, you're there to help support the success of that combined business.
Correct. So, and arguably the most important part of the program is that can be overlooked by many times is to create an integration plan for the successful integration of the acquired dealer, of the selling dealer into the acquired dealer's business to attain the desired outcome based on the way that the seller wanted to sell. And the buyer on his side, her side, looking for attaining the return on investment that they had budgeted for the acquisition. So yes, we work with the management teams from seller and buyer, create an integration plan, work with both of them to be able to effectively implement that and coach them through that to successfully integrate the business based on the plan that they create.
Well, and then underneath all of that, they're still working potentially with the same wholesaler, so the systems don't change all that much to, from the customer's perspective, in terms of what products they're seeing, how they're ordering. Yeah, makes
exactly
sense.
Right. I mean, there in some cases may be a system platform conversion. That's something that we've now done a number of times. We work through with them. But in the case of two SP dealers, no change in product. That is correct. And there's an extensive planning process that we go through with them in identifying all of the challenges that we may encounter in trying to put two businesses together. help them build that plan so that we can do it successfully with them.
Are these all add-ons, or is it all one program? It goes back to like the cost of it, I guess, or so if they want this extra consulting, is that an additional add-on to the GAP program, or is it all inclusive?
All inclusive, all one program from start to finish.
Okay, great. Well, we did go over our 30 minutes, which I think we predicted because there's so much to cover, right? But it's great stuff. I do not want to end the call without maybe doing a little bit of projections. It's in terms of what's happening in the independent dealer channel and kind of the what ifs, and do a little bit of maybe some futuristic thoughts. Any predictions, any thoughts on the independent channel over the next year?
So I think we'll probably see an increase in consolidation with the independent channel over the next year.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there's a number of 65-year-old plus business owners that have had a terrific career, but with the changes in the industry are finally saying time to get out. And again, that's having some insight in the number of dealers that I'm speaking to that I've communicated with on this subject. So increase in consolidation. I think we'll see then independent dealers, what will be the medium-sized independent dealers benefiting from acquisitions, growing through acquisitions. I think that's something that we'll see with independents over the next year. And it'll be interesting to see whether Staples is with Ascendant acquisitive or not with their FTC restrictions, and if this Office Depot strategy of acquiring larger dealers continues or not.
Well, and do you see maybe, I'm envisioning there's only so many $20+ million dealers left. Does Depot then go down a notch, perhaps to a mid-sized dealer? And is that possible? Anything's possible.
Anything is possible. I think it's less likely because the cost of acquisition for them and then the cost of managing that federation program is at a level that it becomes difficult to get any kind of return on their investment when the dealers are below $20 million. So
makes sense.
I don't think you're going to see a lot of deviation in size of dealer acquisitions from Office Depot or even Staples, just because of how expensive it is for them to buy anything with their process.
I just had a curiosity question, and with the Office Depot Federation, these are some significant independents kind of throughout the country. Are they all going on one, even though they're independent of Office Depot, are they all going on one system themselves as a federation and being able to have a national distribution arrangement? I hadn't heard anything about that. I just was wondering if that's in the cards.
So I don't know what's in the cards. Again, I don't know what the plan for consolidation is amongst those dealers. They're maintaining the platforms that they've been on.
Okay.
So that has not changed to date. It's been fairly early on here. Don't know what the plan for consolidation is for the federation dealers or where they're going with that.
All right, great. Anything we missed today that you think would be important to leave with?
No, if this has been terrific. I very much appreciate the opportunity to talk about what's going on in the M&A world and the office products industry. Certainly encourage any of the SP dealers that are on the phone to reach out to me with questions or additional insights that they may like. And I, Krista, as always, just greatly appreciate your help here, your show, and thanks very much for everything. It's been great.
Thank you. We're going to show a slide for our audience with your contact information to reach you at Cleary Consulting. So we'll bring that up right now. And any other way to get a hold of you, maybe just, do you like working socially, connect on LinkedIn, or send you a
Yes,
message through the website?
so email address there, as well as I am on LinkedIn, so you can easily get me there. Either way, the Charlie Cleary at charliecleary.com or LinkedIn connection, and look forward to connecting with you.
Great. Well, thanks, Charlie, for taking the time to spend with us, and thank you for all of your efforts in really impacting the independent dealer channel, and I appreciate that. Thanks.
Krista, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye now.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us. I mean, Charlie was a great guest, and that's going to be our plan and lineup for the third Wednesday of every month. We'll be interviewing someone with SP Richards or affiliated with SP Richards, and we'll be making sure that these are topics that are important to you and your success. So until then, take care and good luck.